le temps du jugement, Chiroma est donc mis au filet. Voilà 50 millions. Chiroma a été livré, a été dit. Mes amis, c'est donc gâté. Écoutez alors.
Qu'est-ce qui va donc se passer en Afrique? Nous sommes avec vous, madame et monsieur. Rebonsoir à tous et bienvenue pour cette...
3, 2, 1, go!
Ok, c'est bon. Bon!
Cameroon is exploding. The capital Yaoundé is burning. The port city of Douala is blocked. And the world is watching a 92-year-old president refuse to let go after 4 decades in power. Tear gas, gunfire, a sea of youths with nothing left to lose. This is the moment Cameroon's history collides with its future. Supporters of opposition leader Issa Chiroma Bakary say he won the 2025 election. The government says otherwise. In between them lies a nation divided by fear and fury. Rumors swirled that ballot boxes vanished overnight and reappeared sealed by dawn. A theory has been put forward that parts of the ruling party no longer believe in their own leader. Nothing is confirmed, but everything feels possible. From Douala's burning barricades to Yaoundé protest violence, the streets are crying for justice. This is not just another African election. It is a reckoning, a battle for dignity after 43 years of silence. Stay with us, because what you're about to see could redraw the map of African democracy. The morning of October 12, 2025 began like every other election day in Cameroon, humid, uneasy, and watched by silent soldiers. By dusk, it had become the country's most explosive vote in 4 decades. At 7 a.m., polling stations opened across Douala, Bafoussam, Garoua, and Yaoundé. Voters queued for hours under the blazing equatorial sun, clutching plastic ID cards, whispering the same question: will our votes finally count? For many, this was more than an election. It was a generational referendum on the man who had ruled them since before they were born. President Paul Biya, 92 years old, 43 years in power, the continent's longest-serving leader. The opposition, led by Issa Chiroma Bakary, promised a new dawn. His rallies had filled stadiums with young faces, a sea of restless hope. This time, he shouted, "We choose our future, not our fear." But by nightfall, that hope began to crack. Videos spread across WhatsApp showing ballot boxes being loaded into unmarked vehicles. Others showed electoral officers sealing results without observers present. There are rumors that entire boxes disappeared from Douala's Nouvelle district before being counted, local journalists reported. The government called them lies. The streets called them proof. Within 24 hours, social media erupted. Hashtags like #Cameroon vote stolen and #Biya must go trended across Africa. The National Elections Commission insisted everything was under control. Yet even as they spoke, police trucks lined the avenues of Yaoundé, and power flickered across several districts, the city falling into what witnesses called a manufactured darkness. By the time preliminary results were announced, placing Biya ahead with 53%, Douala was already on fire. Protesters hurled stones, chanting, "It's over." As clouds of tear gas rolled through the port, the Cameroon election crisis had begun. What made this moment extraordinary wasn't just the accusation of fraud, it was the age gap. 2/3 of Cameroonians are under 30. Most have never known another president. They graduate into unemployment, watch corruption, swallow opportunity, and now see even their vote vanish. To them, this election wasn't stolen from the opposition, it was stolen from the future. A 22-year-old mechanic in Douala told DW's reporter, "We can't eat, we can't dream, we can't wait another 7 years." His words echoed through every corner of social media, turned into slogans painted on walls. No jobs, no justice, no peace. Meanwhile, Biya's supporters, largely civil servants and older elites, celebrated continuity. They spoke of stability, of respect for institutions. But what they called stability, others called stagnation. By October 15th, the protests had spread from Douala to Yaoundé. In the capital's Nonkak district, crowds faced riot police under the shadow of the presidential palace. A witness described, "Hundreds of young people banging pots, waving blank papers, the symbol of a silenced vote." Security forces responded with water cannons and stun grenades. Hospitals later confirmed at least 4 dead, dozens injured. The government imposed a ban on public gatherings, but the streets no longer listen. At the heart of this chaos stands a paradox. A country desperate for change, led by a man who once promised it. In 1982, Biya vowed to build unity and modernity. In 2025, unity lies in question and modernity burns in smoke. Under the sound of sirens, an old woman clutches her national ID and whispers to a journalist, "We voted. They decided." That sentence, quiet, defeated, may haunt Cameroon for years. The images now flooding international screens are haunting. Soldiers guarding polling centers with rifles, young men waving the national flag upside down, a signal of distress. What began as a democratic exercise has mutated into a confrontation between memory and youth, authority and aspiration. In the background, one question pulses through every street and every screen. How long can power survive when its people have stopped believing in it? As the night deepens over Yaoundé and smoke rises from Douala, one truth becomes clear: this is no longer about who won the vote, but who still owns the country. Night fell over Yaoundé like a curtain of smoke. Sirens wailed across the city as police convoys cut through the streets. The air stung with tear gas. Lights flickered. Phones filmed. The crisis was no longer digital. It was tangible. It had a heartbeat, and that heartbeat was fear. In the early hours of October 16th, opposition leader Issa Karoma Bakari appeared before a sea of supporters outside his campaign office. He raised a clenched fist. The crowd roared. "We will not accept a stolen victory," he shouted. "We have the numbers. We have the proof. We have the people." Moments later, the electricity was cut. His microphone went dead. But the chants did not stop. They turned into thunder. For the government, this was the line crossed. By dawn, Douala and Yaoundé were under state security alert. Armored vehicles patrolled the streets. The internet slowed to a crawl, another form of silence. But silence was no longer possible. DW's correspondent reported live from the Bonamasadi district of Douala. Police are firing tear gas. Protesters are throwing stones. You can hear the sound of gunshots in the distance. In Yaoundé, near the central market, footage showed soldiers dragging young men into trucks. Women screamed their names into the night. Human rights groups began calling it the blackout crackdown, and yet something shifted in the air. For every street the government cleared, another two ignited. This was not a political campaign anymore. It was an awakening. Rumors began to spread that even within the ruling CPDM party, young members were uneasy. Some even whispering that Bia's time has passed. Some unverified sources have suggested that local party coordinators in the north had refused to attend victory celebrations. If true, it would be the first visible crack in the wall of loyalty that has protected Bia for 43 years. In the heart of Yaoundé, crowds marched toward the Ministry of Territorial Administration, chanting, "Open the ballots, show us the truth." Riot police formed a line, shields up, batons drawn. The confrontation lasted only minutes, but those minutes will live forever on camera. A young protester stood before the line, raised his ID card and shouted, "You told us this card gives us a voice. Why can't you hear it now?" He was pulled away. His friends kept chanting. The footage went viral within hours. Foreign journalists began arriving. BBC, Al Jazeera, Reuters, all broadcasting the same image. A capital paralyzed by disbelief. Commentators described it as Cameroon's longest night. What began as election unrest had evolved into something larger, a generational mutiny. Across the Atlantic, Cameroonian diaspora communities in Washington, D.C., Paris, and London held vigils outside embassies. Candles were lit. Posters read, "43 years is enough." The global echo was unmistakable. Inside Yaoundé, government spokesmen accused foreign powers of fueling unrest through digital interference. They blamed the opposition for inciting violence. But on the ground, it was not politics driving people. It was hunger, unemployment, humiliation. Economists warned that every day of paralysis cost millions in lost productivity. Hospitals overflowed, schools closed. Yet, even as chaos spread, something remarkable happened. Unity across tribe, language, and religion. Francophones and Anglophones marched side by side. Muslim youth guarded Christian churches from vandalism. Christian groups sheltered Muslim students fleeing police raids. For the first time in years, Cameroon's divisions blurred not in peace, but in protest. And through it all, the old president remained silent. Paul Biya had not spoken publicly since the preliminary results. State TV replayed old footage of him voting, smiling faintly as if time itself refused to move forward. The contrast was surreal. A silent palace surrounded by a screaming nation. Then came the message that sent shockwaves through the country. Issa Karoma Bakari appeared again, this time in a live stream from an undisclosed location. His voice was calm, his tone cold. If the Constitutional Council cannot deliver justice, the streets will. With that, the live stream ended. It was no longer just a demand for transparency, it was a declaration of resistance. By evening, thousands gathered near Avenue Kennedy in Yaoundé. They held candles. Some prayed, some wept, and when the army rolled in, no one moved. They stood still, hands raised, chanting softly, "We are not afraid." That night, videos surfaced showing soldiers lowering their weapons. Not many, just a few, but enough to ignite whispers that something inside the system was beginning to break. A journalist wrote later, "The regime is strong, but the silence of soldiers is stronger." The following dawn, the smoke over Douala glowed orange. The torch of resistance had been lit. If power is a chain, Cameroon has just heard it crack. The morning after, the fire smelled of ash and silence. In Douala, smoke still curled from the remains of burnt tires. In Yaoundé, soldiers stood watch over empty streets. The protest songs had faded, replaced by whispers, curfews, and a fragile calm that felt like glass, ready to shatter at any sound. Shops stayed closed. Schools suspended classes. Markets were deserted, except for women selling bread in hushed voices. People are afraid, one vendor told reporters, not of bullets, of what comes next. The Cameroon election crisis had frozen more than politics. It had paralyzed life itself. Economically, the toll was immediate. The port of Douala, the country's commercial lifeline, halted shipments. Exports of timber, cocoa, and oil slowed as dock workers joined strikes, demanding truth before trade. The central bank warned of severe liquidity strain. Yet, for the people on the ground, economics was just a word. Survival was the currency. Taxi drivers refused to work after their vehicles were smashed during protests. Hospitals ran short of medicine. In the Northwest, aid convoys were blocked by armed groups exploiting the chaos. The United Nations issued a statement calling for humanitarian corridors. But beyond the damage lay something deeper, a fracture in national trust. In cafes and WhatsApp groups, people debated whether the ballot still mattered. "We voted for change, and they gave us curfews," one student posted. For the young generation, 2/3 of the population, democracy now looked like an illusion sold every 7 years. A sociologist from the University of Buea told Al Jazeera, "We have a population that grew up being told to respect elders. Now they are questioning whether age should mean permanence in power." The protests had become a mirror reflecting the generational divide. Older Cameroonians, those who remember the country's early independence, still see Biya as the man who brought order. Younger citizens see him as the symbol of stagnation. Between these two realities lies an identity crisis, a country split between gratitude and grievance. Then came the arrests. In Douala, more than 200 young men were detained overnight. In Yaoundé, activists disappeared without charge. Some reappeared days later with bruises. Others did not return at all. Human rights lawyers warned that fear has replaced dialogue. And yet, something remarkable persisted. Even amid repression, solidarity spread like wildfire. Communities organized secret listening circles, gatherings where people watched videos of the protests, discussed solutions, shared bread, and whispered the same phrase, "We won't be silent again." It was as if Cameroon's youth had found their voice in defiance of silence. In the rural towns of the center region, pastors and imams began holding joint prayers for peace. In universities, students debated political reform, not just leadership change, but constitutional renewal. "Maybe this is our generation's reckoning," said one young teacher. "We were born under Biya. Maybe we will bury his era." Yet, while voices grew louder, the state grew harder. Censorship tightened. Internet blackouts lengthened. The government labeled activists as agents of destabilization. Still, the youth adapted using offline networks, word of mouth, graffiti. On the walls of Douala's Nouvelle district appeared a new slogan, "We have nothing, but we have each other." Politically, the crisis shook even Biya's inner circle. Reports surfaced that senior ministers were divided, some urging dialogue, others demanding crackdown. But dialogue is a dangerous word in a regime built on control. Meanwhile, international markets reacted. The CFA franc slipped. Investors froze projects. But the real loss was not monetary, it was moral. Cameroon, once praised for stability amid storms, now stood exposed, stable only because it never moved. And in that stillness, people began to ask a forbidden question. If leadership never changes, can democracy still exist? For the diaspora, particularly African Americans and African Europeans, Cameroon's struggle felt personal. It was a reflection of a wider African dilemma, the fight between inherited power and earned progress. One Cameroonian activist in Washington put it simply, "If we lose this battle, we lose more than votes. We lose hope. Hope fragile, flickering, yet unextinguished." It lived in the chants of street vendors, in the quiet defiance of mothers hiding wounded sons, in the calloused hands of mechanics repairing broken motorbikes just to return to the protest line. And perhaps that was the paradox of this moment. While institutions cracked, people found strength. The protest had begun as anger, but was slowly becoming identity. The question now is not whether the protests will end, but whether Cameroon itself will ever be the same again. As the smoke thickened over Yaoundé, the world began to take notice cautiously, diplomatically, and far too late. From Addis Ababa, the African Union released a statement urging restraint and dialogue. Its words were familiar, almost ritual, calling on all parties to uphold peace. But for many Cameroonians watching, peace had already been broken. What they wanted now was justice. The European Union echoed the same message, expressing concern over reports of violence and restricted communications. Yet, no sanctions, no investigations, no concrete pressure followed. Diplomacy, as always, moved slower than pain. In Washington, the U.S. State Department spoke in what analysts called strategic ambiguity. A spokesperson told reporters, "The United States supports the Cameroonian people's democratic aspirations. Nothing more. No mention of President Biya, no condemnation of force. Only a familiar phrase, we encourage dialogue." Behind closed doors, diplomats worried about another kind of chaos, the regional kind. Cameroon borders Nigeria, Chad, the Central African Republic, and Gabon, a volatile arc where instability spreads faster than headlines. Western powers feared that pushing Biya too hard could unleash what one policy brief called a domino of disorder. And so, the silence continued. Meanwhile, humanitarian organizations sounded alarms. Amnesty International called for an investigation into arbitrary arrests. Human Rights Watch documented dozens of detentions and injuries. The UN Human Rights Office urged the government to restore internet access. But Yaoundé's official channels denied everything, calling reports foreign exaggerations. Inside the country, the youth were not waiting for international sympathy. Youth protests in Cameroon trend globally on social media, a digital uprising of solidarity. Videos from Douala were reshared in Johannesburg, New York, and Dakar. A movement was forming, not through embassies or boardrooms, but through connection phone to phone, voice to voice. In Paris, the Cameroonian diaspora marched past the French National Assembly, holding signs that read, "France, stop shielding dictators." In London, activists projected the message, "43 years is enough," onto the walls of the BBC headquarters. Even within the Vatican, Pope Francis reportedly prayed for peace in Cameroon, a symbolic but moral pressure on a Catholic-majority nation. And yet, no foreign leader called Biya directly to ask him to step down. No African head of state dared to challenge one of their own. That's the unspoken rule of the continent's old guard. Never question a throne you might one day sit upon. But history does not wait for permission. A theory has been put forward by some analysts that Biya's fall, if it comes, could trigger a generational shift across Central Africa, a Berlin Wall moment for African leadership. The world, for now, watches. Cameroon stands at the crossroads, between diplomacy and dignity, between silence and sovereignty. The question is no longer what the world will do. It's whether Cameroon's people will act before the world decides for them. Cameroon now stands before a mirror cracked, smoky, and honest. The reflection is painful. 43 years of one man's rule, a generation born into waiting, and a nation that has forgotten what change feels like. But in that broken reflection, there is also something new light. The protests that shook Douala and Yaoundé were not just cries of anger. They were declarations of existence. When thousands of young people faced bullets and refused to run, they were saying, "We are still here." 3 paths now lie before Cameroon. The first, reform through dialogue. If President Biya listens, if the opposition holds its ground, if a transitional council is formed, Cameroon could rewrite its constitution, limit presidential terms, empower local governance, and bring the youth into national decision-making. It would not erase the pain, but it could begin to heal it. The second, repression through fear. If the government doubles down, arrests continue, and the streets are silenced, the country risks sliding into a long winter of control. Economically, that means foreign investors leaving. Politically, it means the death of legitimacy. Every day spent suppressing dissent only sharpens it. And the third, rebirth through resilience. This is the path no one can predict, but everyone can feel a movement from below. Churches, universities, women's groups, motorbike unions, all forming an invisible network of courage. They do not wait for leaders. They become them. Across Douala, street artists now paint murals of clenched fists holding torches. In Buea, students quote Nelson Mandela. It always seems impossible until it's done. This is how nations are reborn, not through decrees, but through defiance. The country's future may depend less on who holds power and more on who holds purpose. Cameroon's youth, unemployed yet unbroken, are beginning to see themselves as custodians of that purpose. They are the bridge between pain and possibility. Some analysts fear that without reform, Cameroon could become Africa's next slow explosion. But others see a different outcome, a silent transformation. One that begins not in the palace, but in the people. If Issa Kiroma Bakari remains steadfast, and if elders within the CPDM find the courage to speak truth to power, Cameroon could mark the start of a continental shift from rule to representation, from authority to accountability. Because this crisis is not only about one election, it's about a question echoing far beyond Yaoundé. What does freedom mean when you've never known it? And in that question lies hope, fragile, flickering, but alive. The streets of Yaoundé may quiet down, but the silence that follows will decide whether Cameroon has merely survived or truly awakened. Cameroon is not just in crisis. Cameroon is in transition. The smoke may rise, the chants may fade, but something irreversible has begun. The people, especially the young, have seen their own power. They have tasted courage, and that cannot be unlearned. The Cameroon election crisis has done what no political campaign ever could. It reminded the nation of its voice. From the tear gas streets of Douala to the silent squares of Yaoundé, a message now beats beneath the noise. We are awake. For the world, it is easy to watch from afar and call this chaos. But look closer, and you'll see order being rewritten not by decrees, but by defiance. You'll see students who still march after curfew, mothers who hide protesters in their homes, mechanics who fix broken bikes only to ride back into history. The youth protests in Cameroon are not simply about one president or one election. They are about reclaiming time the decades stolen by fear, the opportunities buried beneath silence. They are about a people demanding to be seen, not as victims of poverty, but as architects of their own destiny. In every revolution, there is a moment when a nation realizes that the walls around it were built by its own consent. Cameroon has reached that moment. The question now is not whether the Cameroon election crisis will end. It is what will be born from it. A broken state or a brave new nation? You, watching this, are part of that answer. Because every view, every comment, every shared voice makes the silence smaller. So tell me, in your own words, what does freedom mean to you? If this story moved you, subscribe, comment, and share. Not for numbers, not for clicks, but to keep the light alive. This is not the end of a crisis. It is the beginning of a conversation. This is not chaos. This is the sound of a nation remembering how to breathe.
I am the winner, and in case somebody can demonstrate the contrary, we are ready.
Number 1. Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to Intervlog, your trusted window into Africa's evolving stories, where calm meets clarity and facts meet thought.
Consequently, any demonstration that does not comply with these requirements is illegal, and those who initiated it would be held accountable for their actions in accordance with the laws of the nation.
Today, we turn our attention to Cameroon, a nation standing at a delicate crossroads between security, politics, and cultural introspection. The recent events following the October 12, 2025 presidential election have revealed not only the strain of political competition, but also the deeper questions about governance, loyalty, and the complex African philosophy of appreciation. On October 25, 2025, Cameroon's Minister of Territorial Administration, Paul Atanga Nji, addressed the nation and the press. His tone was firm yet cautious, reflecting a government seeking to project calm amid confusion. He outlined measures to quell post-election threats. The minister urged citizens to remain calm and to wait patiently for the results from the Constitutional Council. He reminded the nation that protests are a democratic right, but only when done within the law. He recalled earlier crises, from the post-electoral violence of 1992 to the Boko Haram insurgency in the north and the ongoing tensions in the northwest and southwest, and stressed that Cameroon could not afford another descent into insecurity. In his words, the state would not allow the country to sink again. While the government assured calm, the streets of Douala, Bafoussam, and Yaoundé told a different story. Protests had erupted across the nation as opposition supporters claimed victory for their candidate, Issa Chiroma Bakari, and accused the incumbent, President Paul Biya, of manipulating results. Two opposition figures, Aniset Ekane and Jukam Chameni, both prominent members of the Union for Change political platform, were arrested in Douala. Their parties described the arrests as meant to intimidate Cameroonians and silence dissent. In a statement, the African Movement for New Independence and Democracy, MANADEM, accused local security forces of detaining their treasurer and other members. Meanwhile, the government insisted the arrests were necessary to prevent Plan Atanganji, in another press briefing, said security forces had detained several individuals for plotting attacks disguised as protests, warning that their goal was to infiltrate groups and commit acts that could then be blamed on law enforcement. At the heart of all this stands a familiar figure, Paul Biya, 92 years old, one of Africa's longest-serving leaders. The Constitutional Council was expected to announce the results on Monday, yet tensions simmered as crowds continued to gather. Supporters of Chiroma warned against what they called an attempt to rig the vote. Protesters flooded streets in Bafoussam, and motorcyclists chanted for a credible process. One man told a local journalist, "We are tired of the same story every election. We want transparency." Clashes broke out in some cities. In Garoua, where the earlier attack was thwarted, one person, a young teacher named Zairatu Hassana, authorities said she was not among protesters, but had gone out to look for her sister. Her family now mourns in silence, a symbol of how easily ordinary lives are caught in the machinery of political struggle. Beyond the protests and the press briefings, another story unfolds. Not one of bombs or ballots, but of mindset. A journalist reflecting on these events observed that vote buying in Cameroon and across Africa cannot simply be explained through the Western lens of corruption. He recalled watching a video where people queued at polling stations, collecting small sums of money and items bearing Biya's image. These were not necessarily poor people. Some were educated and economically stable, yet they accepted what appeared to be symbolic gifts. Why? Because, as the journalist put it, this gesture reflects an African idea of appreciation. Parable 1. Le cadeau d'un roi n'est jamais vide. In French, there is a proverb, Le cadeau d'un roi n'est jamais vide. Literally, it means, a king's gift is never empty. In this context, the minister's appeal for calm becomes more than a political statement. It becomes a call for national patience, an invitation to allow institutional processes, however imperfect, to unfold between law and legitimacy. Yet legality and legitimacy are not the same. Cameroon's government insists it guarantees the right to protest within the law. But opposition groups argue that laws themselves are often used to suppress dissent. When protests are declared illegal or leaders are detained preemptively, the perception grows that the law protects power, not people. Still, the state faces its own dilemma: how to maintain order without appearing oppressive. Parable 4. Le fleuve qui fait du bruit n'est pas toujours profond. A final French parable says, Le fleuve qui fait du bruit n'est pas toujours profond. The river that makes the most noise is not always deep. In politics, as in life, noise can be deceptive. Protesters shouting in the streets may not represent the majority. Silence, too, can be political. The silence of those who fear instability more than injustice. The Cameroonian government counts on this silent majority, the citizens who prefer calm, even under continuity, to chaos under change. As Cameroon awaits the official election results, it stands between two possible futures. One, where calm prevails, and institutions, however imperfect, continue to function. Another, where suspicion and anger explode, deepening wounds that have yet to heal from previous crises. Atanganji's message was therefore as much about psychology as about policy. His appeal to parents to guide their children against manipulation reveals a deep awareness that the battle for stability is not fought only in the streets, but also in minds. The story of Cameroon today is not merely one of elections and protests. It is the story of how Africa continues to navigate the intersection of tradition and modernity, custom and constitution, gift and governance. It is the story of a continent where democracy is still being interpreted through the lens of cultural history, a place where appreciation can mean gratitude, loyalty, or manipulation, depending on who defines it. In the words of an old African sage, the road to democracy is not straight, it curves through the hearts of men. And so, Cameroon stands still, waiting, watching, and hoping that the next chapter will be written not with fear, but with faith in the possibility of peace. At Intervlog, we do not take sides, we illuminate them. We tell stories that connect the facts to the human condition, because understanding Africa's politics requires understanding Africa's soul. In Cameroon, the soul of the nation is now being tested, not only by ballots and bullets, but by the timeless question of how appreciation becomes allegiance, and how leadership becomes legitimacy. May the coming days bring wisdom to leaders, restraint to protesters, and peace to the people. Cameroon judges reject election rigging complaints. Judges in Cameroon have dismissed calls for the partial or total cancellation of the heavily disputed presidential election, saying they will announce the result on Monday. Major cities in the country have been rocked by protests, with opposition supporters alleging that the 12th October poll was marred by irregularities, including ballot stuffing. Judges on the Constitutional Council dismissed 8 petitions, citing insufficient evidence of irregularities or a lack of jurisdiction to annul results. Opposition candidate Issa Chiroma Bakari has declared himself the winner, a claim rejected by allies of 92-year-old President Paul Biya, who is seeking another 7-year term. Biya has been in power for 43 years and addressed only one campaign rally ahead of the election. Chiroma Bakari, 76, is a former government spokesman who broke ranks with Biya to challenge him for power. He refused to file complaints with the Constitutional Council, whose judges have been appointed by Biya, choosing instead to declare himself the legal and legitimate president. Can the world's oldest president keep his title? The African president who keeps defying death rumors. In a video statement posted on social media, Chiroma Bakari said he had won the election with about 55% of the vote, based on what he said were returns representing 80% of the electorate. If the Constitutional Council proclaims falsified and truncated results, it will be complicit in a breach of trust, he declared. Chiroma Bakari also warned that, with their backs against the wall, the people will have no choice but to take their destiny into their own hands and seek victory wherever they can find it. Biya's ruling party has dismissed his claims of victory, and several officials have described it as illegal because only the Constitutional Council can proclaim official results. The influential Catholic Church this week urged the judges to ensure that the verdict reflected the will of voters. The growing tensions have sparked fears of post-electorals in a country already rocked by a separatist conflict in the Anglophone regions and Boko Haram insurgency in the far north region. This is the end of our program today. See you on Intervlog same time tomorrow. Thanks for watching. Please like and subscribe to my channel and press the bell icon to get new video updates. Thank you for watching Intervlog. Thank you.
Connu de tous, y compris de ceux qui en ont proclamé d'autres. Et la question aussi qui se pose, c'est comment gouverner un pays qui a clairement montré son rejet. Et ça va être un défi qui va se poser pour le pouvoir. Et le deuxième constat, c'est quand même que les Camerounais ont manifesté justement ce rejet, d'abord par les urnes, mais maintenant on voit aussi, depuis dimanche où il y avait une mobilisation, et aujourd'hui, ils ont repris goût un peu à ces contestations civiles, une forme de mobilisation civile. Camerounais qui étaient considérés comme apathiques ou résignés, ça aussi c'est un facteur qu'il faudra prendre en compte. Et je voudrais quand même dire que j'étais assez surprise par l'ampleur de la mobilisation de dimanche à l'appel du président élu, en fait, celui qui a remporté la majorité des suffrages, Issa Tcharouma Bakary. On a bien vu qu'il y avait une disposition répressive mise en place, mais les gens sont quand même sortis de manière assez massive et
même dans
à
la
travers,
capitale d'ailleurs,
même dans la capitale, bien entendu.
Assez surprenant, vu le dispositif policier très lourd qu'il y avait aujourd'hui.
Tout à fait, à travers le pays également. Et ça, c'est des choses qu'on a vues. On ne peut pas au Cameroun chaque fois avoir des élections contestées. On l'a vu en 2018, cette fois-ci c'est encore plus. Mais je tiens quand même à signaler, à faire remarquer que du côté des forces de l'ordre, il y avait de la retenue. Malheureusement, on déplore le décès de 4 jeunes Camerounais.
Au moins 4 personnes, parce qu'aujourd'hui aussi, les Camerounais ont été visés et probablement d'autres morts ont été constatés aujourd'hui sur le terrain.
Eh bien, il faut espérer que cette retenue va se poursuivre parce que je crois que la société civile qui a été particulièrement active cette fois-ci et qui a fait des plateformes de surveillance électorale et qui a essayé d'éviter les fraudes, en tout cas les dénonce, n'a pas du tout l'intention de laisser massacrer les Camerounais comme ça à grande échelle. Mais aussi, j'ai repensé à ce que disait Senghor au sujet de l'armée et des forces de l'ordre. À quelqu'un qui venait se plaindre en disant « oui, mais l'armée, oui, mais les policiers, oui ». Il leur a dit « mais vous savez, les policiers, les militaires, c'est juste des Sénégalais en uniforme ». Et donc, actuellement, moi, je perçois une division et au sein, je dirais même de l'appareil, parce que la base du pouvoir s'était rétrécie. Beaucoup de gens, même dans le système, ne sont pas satisfaits de ces élections, des résultats qui ont été proclamés.
Il n'y a qu'à voir les mines. C'était quand même assez frappant de voir que même pendant la proclamation, la mine était assez serrée dans la salle.
C'était lugubre et puis on a quand même... il y avait une espèce d'ambiance désuète, mortifère, où le président de l'Assemblée n'était pas là parce qu'il est malade, le président du Sénat n'était pas là parce qu'il est malade, le président du Conseil, du Conseil économique et social n'était pas là parce qu'il est décédé, et le président de la Cour suprême n'était pas là non plus. Enfin, on peut faire la liste, il y a même certains ministres qu'on n'a pas vus. C'était pas le grand enthousiasme, dont personne n'est dupe de ce qui est en train de se passer. Mais je voudrais aussi dire, j'ai vu, je suis un peu ce qui se passe, les différents commentaires, les analystes camerounais, nos compatriotes sur place. Ils voient en ce qui se passe la première phase d'un plan qui vise donc à déclarer le président vainqueur et pour ensuite remettre en selle la même équipe qui tire les ficelles derrière son dos et qui va réactiver la guerre des clans. Et il y a un clan qui va perdre parce que celui qui a le pouvoir, qui est puissant, a une certaine influence, une emprise sur des forces de l'ordre, la gendarmerie, même la DGRE, etc. Donc, ils comprennent bien que...
du secrétaire général de la présidence,
ce qui se dit sur place, c'est l'analyse que font beaucoup. Et ils estiment donc que si cette guerre se passe de cette manière et que le but, le plan, est de déclarer à un moment donné que le président a disparu, qu'il est décédé, et qu'il nous a quittés, et qu'on a pris, quelqu'un a pris le pouvoir, et se passe le pouvoir entre eux de manière totalement illégale, sans être élu. Et ça, il y a un des clans qui sera complètement liquidé et éliminé. Je crois qu'ils en sont conscients. C'est pour ça que moi, je peux vous dire que beaucoup étaient, au sein du pouvoir, préféraient cette option d'une transition avec Issa Chiroma parce que c'est par les urnes, elle est légitime, elle est démocratique et elle les protège. Parce que si, après, c'est des cuisines internes autour de tractations à la tunisienne, où on débarque le président d'une manière ou d'une autre et que d'autres se saisissent au pouvoir, ils savent que le camp qui est le mieux placé est le plus dangereux pour eux.
Donc, Marie-Roger, j'insiste sur vous parce que vous allez nous quitter pour un autre plateau de télévision, mais ce qui se passe, cette révolte apparente dans les rues et qui embrase de nombreuses villes du Cameroun, Douala, on a vu notamment sur quelques images là le quartier Noubel, mais d'autres quartiers où on déplore, vous le disiez, des victimes, mais aussi d'autres villes du pays, à Garoua, à l'ouest du pays. Ce qui se passe selon vous n'est pas qu'un fait passager lié à la colère populaire et qui pourrait se calmer dans les prochains jours. On assiste là à quelque chose de majeur.
On ne sait pas comment ça va se passer, mais le mécontentement est profond. Et on ne sait pas comment il va continuer à se manifester. Ça, il y a une coupure nette entre le peuple camerounais et le pouvoir actuel. Je crois que malgré les chiffres qui sont proclamés, personne n'est dupe. Ils le savent tous. Et la détermination, parce que quand on parle des élections, on parle même de Chiroma, il est juste le reflet, la manifestation d'un rejet ou d'un espoir d'alternance. Ça aurait pu être lui, mais ça aurait pu être quelqu'un d'autre. Et actuellement, ce qui se passe, ce n'est pas tellement autour de sa personne. Ce qui se passe, c'est que les Camerounais veulent en finir avec un système qui a paupérisé le pays, qui leur enlève tout espoir et qui est totalement incorrigible. Ils ne pensent pas du tout qu'après 43 ans, on va voir des progrès, on va voir des changements, on va les voir plus préoccupés par le sort des populations. Ça, personne n'y croit. Donc, à partir de là, nous sommes tous des observateurs, on va voir ce qui va se passer, mais la situation est extrêmement difficile pour les Camerounais d'abord, parce que voilà, ils n'ont pas obtenu le résultat qu'ils voulaient, mais aussi pour le pouvoir qui veut régner par la force, apparemment, dans une situation qui a beaucoup évolué.
On a vu des images assez marquantes, certaines durant lesquelles les forces de l'ordre reculaient face à la population. Vous qui avez observé cette vie politique camerounaise depuis plusieurs décennies, où placez-vous dans l'histoire politique camerounaise, justement, ce qui se passe là, quand on sait qu'on a connu les villes mortes de 91, les émeutes de la fin de 2008, ce qui se passe est quand même assez inédit, voir des Camerounais sortir et revendiquer aussi fermement leur droit au respect de leur vote, c'est inédit.
J'espère que les tenants du pouvoir vont en tenir compte, ils vont d'abord réaliser qu'il y a un phénomène inédit qui est plus fort, qui n'est pas le même tout à fait qu'en 2018, il y a 7 ans plus tard. Comme disait quelqu'un, la vieillesse n'est pas un crime, mais la vieillesse est une indication qu'on ne peut plus exercer certaines fonctions. Et en plus, comme le système a été phagocyté, cannibalisé par des clans qui mènent des luttes occultes, on a vu, par des assassinats, par exemple de Martinez Zogo ou d'autres, et on a vu les scandales qui se sont succédés sans sans que personne ne rende les comptes en toute impunité. Là, par exemple, ces élections, rien que Elecam, selon les chiffres officiels, a coûté plus de 22 milliards, c'est-à-dire de l'argent dont on aurait besoin pour faire autre chose, parce que si ça ne sert à rien de faire des élections et de dépenser tout ça si on ne veut pas respecter le résultat. Et donc, il y a tout ça, il y a c'est une ambiance de ras-le-bol dont ils sont conscients et qui, j'insiste, concerne aussi à la fois les corps constitués, l'armée, je sais pas, des gens dans l'administration, les fonctionnaires, etc. C'est généralisé puisque les résultats ont bien montré que Yaoundé, le fief, a basculé pour Issa Chiroma. C'est pour une raison. Donc, nous, on regarde si il y a une once de rationalité, de raison dans ceux qui veulent absolument garder le pouvoir, s'ils pensent qu'on peut diriger en marchant sur des cadavres, ou s'il ne faut pas tenir compte des aspirations des Camerounais pour une fois.
Dernière question, Marie-Roger Biloa, avant de nous quitter. Que peut faire Issa Chiroma Bakary aujourd'hui? Est-ce qu'on se dirige vers le scénario très redouté d'une partition du pays, puisque le Nord et l'extrême Nord, donc le Grand Nord, semblent ne pas vouloir reconnaître la victoire de Paul Biya?
Je ne crois pas que ce soit justement une histoire que de Grand Nord, le Nord. Et c'est même la particularité de ces élections. C'est que les électeurs camerounais ont enjambé allègrement les frontières ethniques qu'on a dressées pendant des années, et que Issa Chiroma n'est que, comme je dis, le catalyseur d'une revendication sociale forte et qui est répandue à travers tout le pays. Donc, je ne pense pas qu'il veuille faire sécession. Je ne suis pas sûre non plus que ce forfait électoral va prévaloir, on ne sait pas. Je crois que c'est dans l'intérêt de personne de continuer à aggraver la situation. Et au fond de moi, il y a toujours quelque chose qui espère que la sagesse, l'intérêt du pays va prévaloir.
Merci beaucoup, Marie-Roger Biloa. On va d'ailleurs écouter Issa Chiroma Bakary. Issa Chiroma Bakary qui s'est exprimé après la proclamation de ces résultats, qui a parlé aux militants du FSNC, mais aussi aux Camerounais qui se sont attroupés autour de chez lui. Issa Chiroma qui a lancé un appel au calme. On l'écoute.
Ils ne peuvent pas. Vous comprenez? Restez là. Il faut maintenant que tout le marché vienne pour qu'ils sachent qu'ils ne peuvent pas. Ok? C'est ça notre défense, notre arme. C'est ça. Les gens vont venir de partout pour être très nombreux.
Ils sont en train de venir, on a déjà appelé le secours.
Ils ne peuvent pas tirer sur les gens. Ils ne peuvent pas. Ils ont tiré deux personnes déjà.
Ils ont tiré de l'autre
Excellence, il y a 5 snipers dans la résidence de Yerima Dewa. 5 snipers.
Ils sont en train de tirer.
Et ils sont en train de tirer.
Ils ont tiré 2 personnes déjà.
Il y a 5 snipers.
Ils ont tiré. Donnez, asseyez-vous. On va donner des informations.
Le président a dit pas d'armes, pas de rien, qu'on reste comme ça.
On respecte la parole du président, s'il vous plaît. Pas d'armes.
Voilà Issa Chiroma Bakary qui essayait donc de remobiliser ses troupes et d'appeler au calme, alors que vous avez vu les tensions qui se multiplient un petit peu partout, à la fois au nord, mais aussi à Douala, à Yaoundé, à Guidère, au nord évidemment, à l'ouest du pays, mais partout sur l'étendue du territoire camerounais. Théophile Kouamouo, je me tourne vers toi désormais. Théophile, quels sont les enseignements que tu souhaites tirer et relever sur ce vote ?
Alors, je me suis appesanti sur les résultats officiels. Le mot officiel, tu l'as dit, il est important parce que ce sont des résultats qui ont été évidemment reconstruits, remasterisés, si on peut dire, et qui témoignent d'une volonté de créer une majorité. Alors que l'on a vu que le pouvoir de Paul Biya, qui en 2018 avait gagné avec 2 500 000 voix sur 3 500 000 suffrages exprimés, et dont le plus puissant bastion était le Nord, parce que la moitié de ces voix-là venaient du Nord. Comment réussit-il aujourd'hui à avoir la majorité alors que le Grand Nord lui a tourné le dos, alors que les grandes villes comme Yaoundé, Douala, Bafoussam, Garoua, Maroua lui ont tourné le dos? Comment parvient-il aujourd'hui, contre toute logique, contre les milliers de PV que nous avons pu consulter, comment parvient-il à gagner ces élections selon le Conseil constitutionnel? Alors, j'ai comparé le corps électoral réel, c'est-à-dire les votants réels de 2018 et de 2025. Et il apparaît très clairement, quand on fait une analyse régionale, région par région, qu'il y ait une hausse assez forte du nombre.
Nous sommes déjà presque arrivés à la fin de cette édition spéciale, l'une des chaînes sociopolitiques. Alors, bienvenue donc pour la prochaine.